the one specific outlier that came out of this whole this currency dimension and how that's changing the yen currency. And can you correlate that directly to your demand patterns that you see on Expedia, the whole platform?
Absolutely. One of the most significant demand patterns that we saw was because of the strengthening of the euro, the prices in the US prices for hotels became quite effectively cheap for European consumers. And we've seen record numbers of European consumers coming to the US, especially markets that are interesting to European consumers, New York, San Francisco, Orlando, etc. It was a big boon for them this year.
And the strengthening of the yen and now the weakening of the euro, is that changing?
Well, yes, we expect it to, and we're seeing a weakening of the European consumer coming to the US. The question is, are you going to, because of the strong dollar, see the US consumer go out more, go to Asia, go to Europe more? Those trips tend to be more expensive. So to my mind, there's a real question as to whether that takes effect this year in these kinds of economic climes.
And the other, as the CEO of now, you're managing lots of different brands, portfolio.
Yes.
I mean, how do you allocate bandwidth in a day? I mean, you have to manage allocation bandwidth by geography and by products and by brands, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, just give a sense of that, I mean, as a CEO level agenda.
Honestly, from the way I allocate it is by hiring great people. So what's surprising to me as being a CEO is how much time you take as far as finding people, coaching them, putting them in places, because if you've got a great person, for example, running hotels.com out of Europe, you really don't need to allocate that much time against that person, and with information flow, etc., the communication becomes on an as-needed basis versus, let's say, an executive that you have to babysit. So it's very, very much of a people
And do
person.
you handle management expertise at the level below you, or do you have to also interact with the level below that?
Absolutely 2 levels down.
Okay.
I often have even regular meetings, skip-level meetings, so that I get a sense of how those players are doing and what's going on in the marketplace. And we also have manager feedback, where I'm constantly reading feedback about my direct reports, how they're doing, and coach them on where they can get better.
And how much of time do you spend thinking of search as a CEO of Expedia?
Honestly, most of my time is, to the extent that it's not directly related to the business's hand, is going on the various websites, looking at our experience versus other sites out there. I do go on Google all the time, and I'm constantly searching to see who comes up where. But we've got some incredible search brains at the business, so I'll go and speak with them. But honestly, I don't have a lot to add.
And one of the challenges in UK has been the merchant model in some of the other markets, and that's why Venier was a commission and bookings. Did you have to kind of change your orientation for the European market?
Well, I think especially for secondary and tertiary markets, I do think that we have to change our orientation to some way. The merchant model is great in large tourist destinations with big package markets, etc. But when you're looking at a Dudley in the UK, smaller markets, secondary, tertiary markets, we do think that a balance between merchant and agency is appropriate, which is why we bought Venere.
But you bought the other player also. Basically, you kind of cleaned out the Italian market, right? You bought.
We bought Venere, and then we've got Expedia and Hotels.com being very aggressive there.
The one thing is, on one hand, your whole platform the global platform is on the supply side, what you're aggregating.
Yes.
But on the consumer side, for demand aggregation, don't you think there is brand fragmentation happening in the consumer space, or is that something that you think is not relevant?
To some extent, we don't think it's relevant, because we don't think any one travel brand can speak to every single consumer out there, and we see consumer behavior. They like to check out different sites. Right. So we're not going to go out there and fight consumer behavior. We're going to design our business to match that consumer behavior. So my hope is that if they go on 3 travel sites, those are 3 sites that we own.
And now, from a geographic orientation, is the US on an autopilot from your management bandwidth, and your focus is Europe and other Asia, or is US market is something that you constantly also think of?
I'm constantly thinking of it. There's so much complexity around the business. There's so much innovation going on. There are new players out there. Europe and APAC get an unfair share of bandwidth relative to their size. but I think that's perfectly appropriate. But I do spend a ton of time in the U.S. because it's really interesting things that then Europe and Asia can learn from.
And the vacation rental market, is that something that's on your horizon when you see companies like HomeAway raise so much of capital, which is a business essentially that you can do effectively?
Well, it's I think it's easier said than done doing it effectively. We have actually made an investment in a company called FlipKey through TripAdvisor. So to the extent that we get into that business, it'll be more through a listing/advertising model, and we're working with the FlipKey folks who are great.
And last question, just Asia, because I cover Asia. You have a portfolio, markets there.
Yes.
Does Elong run independently, or is it something that, again, you spend time, your Asian team spends time?
I actually was there 2 weeks ago and met with Guangfu, the CEO there. It's run essentially as an independent company. We control it, but we made the bet on Guangfu and his management team, so we don't micromanage them. But we do offer help, strategic advice on what to do. Many times we'll bring in employees from the US, et cetera, to help them out with various parts of their operation which can be improved. But the Chinese market's so different from these other markets that you can't take one set of strategies and move them into another market without really a local management team taking the reins.
Thank you so much.